15th century Antwerp. It's a little like 1950s New York. The old market town of artisans and fishermen looking out to the North Sea has become a frontline financial center. Flanders is aglow, and Antwerp is a new creative hub of Europe, attracting the finest artists. The Middle Ages are coming to an end, with the splendor of the Renaissance just around the corner. The study of artist Quentin massys is in the middle of the city. In this year of 1514, he is working on what is regarded as a masterpiece of Flemish Renaissance, The Moneylender and His Wife. What do we see? At first glance, a simple scene depicting a moneylender at work beside his wife. The theme of the jeweler or money changer has been tackled and reinterpreted many times in the history of art as a way for artists to condemn the greed and avarice that prevailed in this rising occupation. There's nothing of that in Massys's work, or at least there doesn't appear to be. But various objects scattered here and there in the composition catch our eye and seem to have a double meaning. What exactly is Massys trying to tell us? To find out, we must examine the elements, gestures, and faces, and delve beneath the surface of the painting to try to understand what it is telling us about a city, a country, and an era. The Moneylender and His Wife ushers us quietly into a detailed rendering of a 16th century money exchange in Antwerp. The two protagonists are going about their business as though they were alone in the world. This scene of daily life seems very close to us. We want to sit down at their table. In front of the man is a pile of money of various denominations. Weights, rings slipped into a paper roll, a box containing pearls, and a cut glass crystal tankard. Between him and his wife is a small, convex mirror. On the two shelves behind them can be observed a dish made from tin or silver, a piece of fruit with grainy skin, some lined paper from a ledger, a book, a snuffed-out candle, some glass beads, and a small roll of parchment. On one of the papers, the artist has discreetly signed his painting. He has drawn a kind of crucifix made up of a hammer and an anvil, maybe alluding to his first job as a blacksmith. But all eyes are on the money and the scales. We recognize foreign currencies, such as the English penny or the Sicilian trifolaro, that have traveled a long road to get here. Let's now exit by the small door on the right of the picture, where two figures are deep in discussion, to get some idea of what life is like outside during this period. Now let's stroll along to the port. It is teeming with energy and a great deal of hustle and bustle. Antwerp is a cosmopolitan city, a hub where currencies, raw materials, and exotic products all converge. Historian Paul Filippo describes the bustle in these terms. Portuguese merchants trade spices brought from India for metals from Central Europe and English linen, which are immediately dispatched to Germany. Sugar from the Canaries, wines from France and the Rhine, Gouda cheese, Haarlem beer, and fish from Zealand also converge here to be re-exported to other ports in Europe, Africa, Asia, and America. Prior to arriving on his premises, the coins of our moneylender have been around the world. Let's put ourselves in his shoes for a moment. Like every Renaissance man, he has seen the discovery of new lands in hitherto ignored parts of the globe. His life has been turned upside down. Let's remind ourselves of a few dates. 1486, Bartholomew Diaz is the first European to venture as far as the Cape of Good Hope. 1492, Christopher Columbus reaches the Americas. Barely has the New World opened up when Vasco da Gama sails for Calcutta and opens a passage to India in 1498. 400 years later, writer Stefan Zweig wrote, "With every salvo of cannon fire greeting the return of a galleon, a curious crowd gathers at the port to hear news from these newly explored countries, to admire previously unseen birds, animals, and men. They quiver with astonishment at the sight of the huge cargoes of gold and silver. The word goes around Europe, which is now, thanks to the heroism of her children, the center of the world, the master of the universe." In Massys's canvas, the coins on the table are the only evidence of the highly charged hustle and bustle that prevails on the outside. His picture oozes calmness and tranquility. It emanates a profound sense of balance. First, there's a symmetry of the composition. The left side of the painting seems to reflect the right. If we place a mirror image of the picture onto the original, we can see that figures and lines are superimposed. Light falls from the window out of shot, above left of the picture. Its direction is no coincidence. It highlights the spiritual values embodied by the woman and the objects belonging to the world of religion, while leaving in the shade the material values represented by the man and the objects associated with the world of commerce. The static and geometric appearance of the composition is contradicted by a knowing suggestion of movement formed by the bodies of the man and woman leaning slightly towards one another. By the pages of the prayer book the woman is preparing to turn, and by the slight swing of the trays on the scales. Massys instills his figures with astonishing grace. Through tiny, extremely delicate touches, he makes the complexions of faces, the lighting effects, the materials and the images translucent. The illusion is perfect. Even in the mirror placed on the table before us, where the artist extends a sense of detail by capturing the belfry of Antwerp Cathedral. The cathedral is a nerve center for artists. An exhibition space is given over to them in the shadow of the building. This is the place to be to show your work and obtain commissions. Massys is in the right place at the right time. Antwerp is a city par excellence for a painter to forge a career. Many flock here from all over the country to make a name for themselves. This is where they set up shop, sell, and negotiate. An international art market develops, the first of its type. Flemish painters are much appreciated for their portraits. They also invent the first genre scenes, often with a satirical or moralizing vein running through them. Quentin Massys is one of the main instigators. Let's go back to his studio. When Massys puts the final touches to The Moneylender and His Wife, he is 48 years old and regarded as one of the grand masters of Antwerp painting. Born in Louvain in 1466, he worked as a blacksmith alongside his father until the age of 20 before taking up painting, first in his hometown, then at the Painters Guild in Antwerp. He paints alone, helped by a few apprentices who crush his colors or deliver to his customers. All the smart set hurry to his studio. Business is booming. From the early stages of his career, Massys shows his special talents. He paints religious works, such as the monumental triptych, the St. John altarpiece, and the Lamentation for Antwerp Cathedral. He is soon spotted by the wealthy Flemish middle classes, who commission numerous portraits. Might The Moneylender and His Wife be one of them? A couple of traders could very well have commissioned this Massys portrait. But the lines of the figures remain strangely neutral, not very recognizable. This desire not to characterize the faces supports the theory that Massys painted an allegory. The woman's features are those of a medieval virgin. Her hand is placed on a prayer book bearing an illustration of a Madonna and Child, dressed like her in a red coat. What is Massys trying to tell us through her? To understand, let's look at some other books written by his friend Erasmus, whose portrait he painted in 1517. Erasmus, tireless traveler, tutor to princes, advisor to kings, was the Catholic priest known as the Prince of Humanists and the period's finest chronicler of the great changes then underway. He wrote several major texts, notably The Education of a Christian Prince, The Praise of Folly, and Ecclesiastes, condemning the excessive powers of the Catholic Church and advocating moral over material values. Stefan Zweig tells us, he was, of all Western writers and authors, the first pacifist fighter, an eloquent defender of humanist, social, and spiritual ideals. Erasmus liked many things that we hold dear: poetry and philosophy, languages and people, indeed, the whole of humanity, and he regarded it as his personal mission to raise their morality. He detested only one thing in the world: fanaticism. And it was precisely this fanaticism that came to plunge Flanders into chaos. Let's now cast ourselves 50 years into the future. The Calvinists refused to venerate holy images, storming into churches to slash pictures and smash sculptures. For Philip II of Spain, whose empire extends to the Netherlands, this violation of holy places represents a political threat. He sends his army, 10,000 men, invade Brussels and immediately embark upon a reign of terror. This bloody repression triggers a war that will last for 80 years, later referred to as the Dutch Revolt. Bruegel captured the horror in his famous picture, The Procession to Cavalry. Exodus, massacres, torment, persecution. Nothing and nobody is spared in the wave of terror emanating from Spain. Some see in the eyes of the moneylender's wife, turning away from the prayer book and thus from God, a faint premonition of these upheavals. The picture, however, seems like a moment frozen in time, as evidenced by the costumes of the figures in the fashion of the previous century. This obsolescence is deliberate, with the artist's work harking back to Jan van Eyck's famous picture, Arnolfini Portrait, painted 70 years earlier. The women's costumes are similar. The dress is identical to the one worn by Van Eyck's wife in this portrait of her, painted in 1439. By using these similarities, Massys is paying tribute to his prestigious elder. And yet other objects in the painting are very much of their day. Let's return to the gold coins. The sailors and merchants trading in Antwerp need to assess the value of their currency. If we examine the composition closely, we can see that a diagonal running across the picture, from the gold coins through the hand of the moneylender, reaches a pile of parchments on the shelf. Could the painter be making some mysterious connection here? What might those parchments contain? Let's consider for a moment. In this age of adventure, it is difficult and risky to transport large sums by road or by sea. Nobody is safe from an attack by bandits or a shipwreck. Fortunately, the system of bill of exchanges, the forerunner of the bank check, allows these risks to be minimized. The principle is simple. A sum is handed over to a banker whose organization has offices abroad. This banker, using a dummy entry between establishments, pays an addressee in another country. In this simple scrap of paper lie the foundations of modern-day capitalism. We can thus regard the documents on the shelves in the picture as genuine 16th century checkbooks. Moving on to the weights. These cups are piled like Russian dolls to form what is known as a crown of cups. Their mass establishes a standard. The kilogram still did not exist, and systems of weights and measures were not the same throughout Europe. Called an assay balance, the scales on which all eyes are focused reflect the last judgment by which our good and our bad deeds will be evaluated. Let's for a moment admire the act of weighing, emphasizing the delicacy of the weigher's hands. Strangely, these hands recall others. Might Quentin Massys have drawn inspiration from the hands of Leonardo da Vinci's The Lady with an Ermine? It's a valid hypothesis. The Italian master's painting dates back to 1488, 25 years earlier. During this period, Flemish and Italian artists influenced one another a great deal. What about the convex mirror? Originally, such mirrors allowed the comings and goings of customers to be monitored in a shop. But by turning it towards us, Massys turns it into something else. This is another nod to Van Eyck, evoking once again the Arnolfini portrait. The mirror is also found in Saint Eligius by Petrus Christus, as well as in the Verle triptych painted by the master of Flamal. In Massys's mirror, we see a mysterious figure. So who is this man in orangey red clothes? Is it maybe a client or a trader come to change currencies? But a merchant would not divert his gaze to immerse himself in reading while his treasures were being examined. He would be sitting right in front of the weigher and not on the side against the window. Another possibility is that it is a religious figure. It might be Zechariah, father of John the Baptist, sometimes depicted in ancient paintings. Like in Van Eyck's work, where Zechariah is immersed in the Holy Scriptures, beside a window, while his son is being born. A more simple modern interpretation is that it is a self-portrait of the artist, a common practice among Renaissance painters. In the Middle Ages, spherical mirrors evoke a world of quite a different kind, that of the Creator. In 1453, German philosopher Nicholas of Cusa wrote that God is an eye. For the eye is like a mirror, and a mirror, however small, figuratively takes into itself a vast mountain and all that exists on the mountain's surface. So everything becomes clear. Objects are placed deliberately in the composition, chosen with care by the painter for their symbolic value. The wooden boxes are cases to which faith has retired. The fruit on the shelf alludes to original sin. The snuffed-out candle signifies death. A religious allegory takes shape behind this genre scene. There can be no doubt that in The Moneylender and His Wife lurks a memento mori illustrating the words from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. Remember, you are going to die. In this version, called The Usurers, the space is identical, but the rest is unrecognizable. A greedy man tightly grips a bag of gold coins in his fist, money piled high on the table, while vulgar ledgers and accounting records are stacked up on the shelf behind. Faces that had once been calm and humble now express distrust and the lure of gain. The two men who appeared outside the shop suddenly burst into the picture and seemed to covet the treasure of the gold weigher, now transformed into a usurer. The faces have become grotesque, hideous. The men are now grasping and avaricious. In view of this comparison, the meaning behind The Moneylender and His Wife suddenly becomes clear. The painter is cautioning against the circulation of money detached from any form of religious and moral consideration. He is telling us that only before God can a banking system find justice and equity in this new, changing, and complex Renaissance world. The need for a moral capitalism guided by spiritual values. This is a message conveyed by the subtle brushstrokes of Quentin Massys.